I know that a good many of you expect that I will explain to you the present world economy and especially that unprecedented stock exchange boom in the U.S., and I'm not even going to try. Nobody can explain something that has no precedent. We are in a profound transition period, perhaps the most profound one since the Industrial Revolution 200 years ago. We are probably roughly where the Industrial Revolution was after the first 30 years, which is around 1810, and it did not really become clear what kind of an economy and society and polity would emerge until another 20, 25 years. And until that has happened, you don't really know. You don't understand. But at the same time, let me say, there are already several profound and unprecedented changes that have already happened and that will determine certainly the economy of the developed countries and of the emerging countries for the next, I would say 25 years at least. And it's on those that I shall concentrate in my presentation. And the first one is that the next 25 years in all developed and in most emerging countries are not going to be dominated by economics. They are going to be dominated by social issues. And perhaps I'll start out with a question which I got from Eduardo Bomangelo of Siglo Retirement Investments in Brazil, who said, how important is it in Argentina and Brazil to rebuild our broken social systems? Senor Angelo, Senor Angelo, this is not confined to Argentina and Brazil. All social security systems are totally broken down, and what will dominate the politics and policies of all developed and of most emerging countries is precisely how to adjust the social security systems to the population realities. When we started Social Security a little over 100 years ago in Germany, the Germans set the retirement age at age 88 because that was 35 years beyond their mean survival age. Survival age in Germany in 1886 was 34 years. And today, survival age that corresponds to that, well, would be 100. But actually, survival age that corresponds to our retirement age in the U.S. of 65 today is about 79. The worst case is Japan, where the retirement age is the lowest and survival age is the longest. And we will have to reshape Social Security, which was designed to encourage retirement, to discourage retirement. And we will see a split between retirement age and stopping working. People will retire from their jobs, maybe at as early as they do now at 55, but they will not be able to stop working, partly for economic reasons. We will not be able to support them, partly for psychological reasons. Playing bridge for 30 years is not attractive. And this will become increasingly crucial as more and more of the older people will not have been manual workers, but will not have worked with their hands, and increasingly will have been knowledge workers. And that turning period is around the year 2010. And I don't have to tell you how incredibly difficult it is politically to take away anything. And the older people are going to fight tooth and nails for every single benefit, and yet there is no way out. By the year 2020, able-bodied people will have to work, not full-time necessarily, but part-time one way or another, till they're in their 70s. And this is going to be the central problem, not just of Argentina and Brazil. All countries face it. And the worst are the Japanese, for the reason that this also are the country which will have the smallest population of young people. In all but the English-speaking countries, the number in all developed countries, except the English-speaking countries, especially the US, in Japan and in Western Europe, the birth rate has fallen way below replacement rate, and the number of young people is already going down very sharply, and there will be fewer and fewer young people to support more and more older people. And this is going to be the central, the overwhelming issue in all countries, and one can predict that it will totally change our politics. You have already seen that in the German-speaking countries of Europe, in Austria, in Switzerland, and in Germany, new parties that have basically only one policy, keep out foreigners, no immigration, are growing very rapidly, because in these countries with dropping population of young people, there will be increasing immigration pressure. And let me say, the critical country is going to be Japan. Japan has made its rise because it could copy 15 years later what the advanced countries of the West had done and do it a little better. And now Japan will have to find its own solutions, something it has not done in 150 years, and is totally unprepared for. So accept the fact that the next 25 years will be dominated by social issues, and by the social issues Senor Angelo from Signa in Brazil raised. And there's an important difference, however, between the English-speaking countries, which means primarily the US, and the rest of the developed world. Because in the US, in Australia, in the UK, we will still have growing numbers of young people for 25 years, largely because we already have accepted large numbers of immigrants who have, first they are young people, most of the immigrants, and secondly, they have the higher birth rates of the countries they come from. And if we didn't have the immigrants in the U.S., our birth rate would also be well below the production rate, and the number of young people in the U.S. would also be falling sharply, while the number of aging people would grow very fast. But for the next 25 years, the U.S., the UK, Australia, Canada will have a distinct advantage over the rest of the developed countries, simply because they still will have a very abundant, is perhaps too big a word, but a very adequate supply of younger people. Then it will change after 1820. Our population as profile will look very much like that of Germany or Italy, of Japan, where the number of young people is already dropping very sharply, while the number of old people is going up even more sharply. And this is going to be the central issue every place, dominating policies and politics and overshadowing all economic issues. It will also, let me say, make for not protectionism. I think what we are going to see is something that is neither free trade nor protectionism. It is regionalism. The European Economic Union, the North American Free Trade Area, Mercosur, these very difficult regional units in which a very large region tries to be, I wouldn't say self-sufficient, but tries to be very protectionist against the outside, and free trade inside, which are unprecedented, which nobody yet knows how to manage, will be central to our political and economic problems of the next 20 years. Now let me come to the next question, and again I would like to begin with one of the questions one of you raised. Senor Enrique Azuaga, the general manager of Gestion magazine, says, what skills, what structures will the corporation require? Well, let me say very bluntly that the corporation as we know it and as we have developed it the last 125 years is not going to survive the next 30 years. I am just at present working on a story called Can the Multinational Survive E-Commerce? The answer is no, not in its present form. If only because in e-commerce the center of gravity shifts totally to the distributor, who can be located any place, and who is not committed to any manufacturer or any manufacturer's brand, and who has the real power increasingly. But also with so many of the older people not being traditional employees and yet working, we will have to develop very new relationships to people, especially to high-knowledge people, who increasingly will not remain employees, perhaps at the very, very top, but not where the knowledge people really matter, which is the upper middle, the professionals, the experts. They probably increasingly, you already see it in the US, you see it in Germany, you see it in France, you see it even in Japan. They increasingly retire from their full-time job and keep on working as contractors, consultants, part-time, partly with their old employers, partly building their own consulting base, partly through a temporary agency, partly independently, all kinds of relationships which bluntly no corporation I know yet knows how to handle. I see that in the American university too, and we don't know how to handle it, but we will have to learn it. And so it is predictable that the corporation in 25 years will be a very different structure. And this leads to the question which Senor Victor Datri of Maxima, which I take it is part of the old Hong Kong and Shanghai Banking Corporation group, asked, what about the present trend towards consolidations and mergers? And let me say there is, yes, there is a merger boom, but it is this very prominent. All you have to do is look at the front page of your daily paper and you see a big merger. What you don't see, because if it's in the paper at all, it's in the back pages, are the demergers, the divestitures, the sales of divisions, the spinning off of businesses. Actually, we are in a period of deconsolidation. To give you just one example, one of the world's largest chemical companies, Imperial Chemicals in the UK, founded in 1926, has spun off in the last 10 years 6 of its 11 businesses, more than half, and concentrated on 3. And that is, and the ones that spun off are independent, medium-sized companies. And the same is happening in finance, and the same is happening almost everywhere. And here is the big merger between the biggest, or the second biggest German automobile company, Daimler-Benz, and the third largest American automobile company, Chrysler, and at the same time creating what is the world's second largest automobile company after General Motors. And at the same time, both Daimler-Benz and Chrysler are getting rid, Daimler-Benz, of its defense business, of its space business, of its heavy truck business, and so on, so that you have a company concentrating only on passenger cars, a very big one, but you have actually less consolidation. But the biggest development and the most important one is not in the papers at all and is not reported. More and more institutions, and not just businesses, our own university is a good example, are growing not through acquisition, not through mergers, but through alliances and partnerships and know-how agreements. In 2 weeks, one of the very big and important Japanese universities is coming over here to us. They want us to create a new major business school by merging our management school. Merging may be too big a term. We are working with our management school and having at the same time a new Japanese management school, both in this one campus in Japan and one in the US. And this is an alliance. We are not merging. They are not going to run it. We are going to run it probably. But most of the students will be Japanese students simply because the Japanese university is 6 times our size. And that's very typical, and I see that in hospitals, but above all, I see that in businesses. And to give you just one example, I questioned 30 companies I've known for years, mostly manufacturing companies. 10 years ago, they had on average 6 or 7 alliances. Now they have on average more than 200 each, and they're fairly typical. And this requires very new skills on the part of the executive, of which I will talk a little later when I switch from the basic trends in economy and society to what they mean for the individual executive. And now let me switch to a totally different topic. I have already said that e-commerce is the most profound development. Let me say that 12 years ago, nobody foresaw it, and I mean literally nobody. I was being asked to be a member of a very distinguished panel anticipating the impact of the information revolution, and not one of us foresaw e-commerce. But also nobody foresaw where it would become important. We don't know that yet. We know a few areas. It is quite clear by now that e-commerce to the information revolution is what the railroad was to the industrial revolution. About the same time period between Watt's improved steam engine, which triggered the industrial revolution, and the railroad, about 55 years. And e-commerce is already transforming the economy and above all transforming business. As I already mentioned, e-commerce shifts the burden, the center of gravity, from manufacturing to distribution. Manufacturers become suppliers. But it also completely changes the structure. E-commerce requires total centralization. All orders, no matter where they come from in the world, go to one center. And yet delivery has to be local. And so e-commerce will require that there is a totally centralized top management structure built around distribution and e-commerce, and a totally decentralized supply structure of products or services, and a totally decentralized delivery structure. And what I already see is that businesses that only a few years ago began to organize themselves worldwide by product lines are beginning to split themselves into 3 parallel, coordinated but autonomous businesses. The center, which is also the center of strategy, is the e-commerce. There is a supply business, getting the products or services, and there's a services business and delivery business, which, by the way, nobody yet knows, really knows yet how to organize for anything that cannot be delivered by parcel post, such as books. And so this is why I don't believe that today's multinational is likely to survive it, certainly not in its present form, but why I also do not believe that the present organization that sees a worldwide business in, let's say, tractors or earth-moving equipment or even financial services is likely to survive the way we have it now. And I don't think it makes sense to speculate which products and services will be taken over by e-commerce. That whenever we have had a new distribution channel, what went through it was totally unpredictable and totally unexpected. And let me say, as all of you know, e-commerce has gone furthest in books. And that was one product we all knew would never be delivered via e-commerce. All the publishers I know use it, and I agreed with them. I was just as wrong. We don't know. And in the U.S. today, probably more than half of all new passenger cars are actually bought over the internet. So they're still delivered by a dealer. They have to be delivered locally. And again, that's not what we predicted or anticipated. But we do know that a new major distribution channel totally changes not only what is being sold, but above all, how and what is being bought. And this leads me to the question which Rolanda Argenti of MasterCard Argentina asked: what characteristics will mark the consumers in terms of expectations, demands, and purchasing behavior? What will make them choose one company and not another? Senor Argenti, nobody can answer that yet. But we can say that there will be change. One thing we can already say is that consumers will not be conscious of distance. I have a new book out a few months ago, and as it happened, I know that the first buyer bought it over the internet, and he was an Argentinian. He's a friend of mine. He called me up and said, "Peter, I just bought your new book, and I'm the first one to have bought it." And I said, "How do you know?" He said, "Because the lady at Amazon.com who sold it to me told me." And Amazon.com has no idea where that order comes from and couldn't care less. And he just called a telephone number, period. And he has no idea where Amazon.com is located. I don't know it either. And it doesn't matter. And distance, the railroad 170 years ago made distance manageable, which had a tremendous impact not only on the economy and society, but on the human imagination. E-commerce eliminates distance. And what that does to customers, we don't know. And one thing is predictable. On the one hand, it will make competition global. Every company in the world will be in competition with every other company in the world simply because it can appear in its market overnight. And at the same time, it is likely to strengthen local tastes, to strengthen local values, so that the supplier will have to be both global and local, and will have to know much more about the local customer than most of them know today. Now, that may not be true for a few unique brands, let's say Coca-Cola, which is the same every place, though even that's beginning to change. But it's certainly going to be true for most consumer goods. But at the same time, it is even more likely that the greatest growth area for e-commerce will not be the consumer market, but the industrial market. And that, for instance, the manufacturer needing a new machine tool will have the ability to shop all the world over without, and the supplier, on the other hand, will have to know how an Argentinian company works, what its requirements are, and so that even a medium-sized manufacturer or supplier of a specialty product, let's say a machine tool, will have to be global in his information and in his marketing, and very local in his service. And this is something that so far, yes, I know a few businesses, perhaps the outstanding example is that Brazilian aircraft manufacturer, Embraer, which probably understands more about local markets for the kind of medium-sized planes it makes than anybody else, and at the same time is global in its marketing and in its service, but very few people. And that's a very specialized product with a very small number of customers, and therefore relatively easy. But very few other companies or institutions I know that yet, and we have to learn that. And now let me come to my final major development, and you may say, this is very intangible. It is. That is why it's so important. One of the major characteristics of the 20th century, which is all but gone, was the steady decline in the relative purchasing power of the products of the land, agricultural products, forest products, metals and minerals. I don't have to tell you in Argentina that from having been one of the world's richest countries in 1913 because of your tremendous production of cereals, wheat, and of meat, you have become one of the poorer countries. From number 5 in gross personal product to about number 50. Not because you are any less productive. In fact, you are far more productive, but because the relative purchasing power of the product of the land relative to manufactured goods has been going down for 100 years now at the rate of almost 1% compound a year, which means by more than 50%. And the same has happened in the U.S. And the main beneficiary of this, by the way, has been Japan, because Japan is the country that proportionately imports more of the products of the land than any other country in the world. And if Japan had to pay for its imports of the products of the land, food and forest products and minerals and metals and petroleum, as much in relation to manufactured goods as she would have had to pay in 1900, Japan would have simply an absolutely unmanageable trade deficit and couldn't manage at all. And what is now beginning is that the relative purchasing power of manufactured goods is beginning to go down, has already begun to go down, at about the same rate of 1% compound a year. The economist still talks of the 3 factors of production: land, labor, and capital. Actually, land has become a very minor one. An enormous increase in production. We produce 5 times as much food in the world today we produced in 1900, maybe 7 times as much. A tremendous decrease in price, less than 1/3. And employment has all but disappeared. It's down to 2% of the workforce in the U.S., which is still the largest exporter of agricultural and land products. And it's going down equally fast in Europe and in Japan, and I suspect in Argentina too. And now we see the same process in manufacturing, a steady, tremendous increase in production, coupled, well, manufacturing production in the world has tripled since 1950, at least tripled. An enormous decrease in manufacturing employment. In the U.S., it was 1/4 of the labor force only 40 years ago. It's now less than a sixth. The same thing is happening in Europe. It's beginning in Japan. And a steady erosion in prices, so that it is predictable that in relative purchasing power compared to the price of knowledge, and that means management primarily, manufacturing goods 20, 30 years from now will be down to maybe 1/2 of the relative purchasing power. Now, this has tremendous consequences. First, it means that the countries that have done the best in the post-World War II period, which is primarily Japan and Germany, are the most endangered countries, because they are the most dependent on manufacturing. It also means, and that is a very dangerous development, that underdeveloped countries, developed countries cannot hope to base their development on cheap manufacturing labor. The productivity of labor in the main manufacturing countries is going up so fast that for most products, cheap labor is no longer an important cost factor. Not for all. Knitting, sweaters, yes. But making the yarn to knit the sweaters with, no. There the labor content is about 11%. In knitting it's still 70%. Making automobiles, well, when I came in, and I've been working with the automobile industry almost 50 years, the labor content of an automobile was almost 70%. By the mid-50s or early 60s, 15 years later, it was still above 35%. The newest Toyota plant going up just now will have a direct labor content of no more than 14%, maybe 15. Not because of automation, but because of the reorganization of manufacturing work primarily, and the tremendous increase as a result of productivity. And that makes it, yes, you probably can still produce an automobile in Indonesia that's a copy of a small Japanese or small European car, but you no longer can do it for less money than the Japanese or the Europeans have to pay. You have a big market in Indonesia, but the hopes that you can sell it on the world market, forget it. You can't compete because low labor costs, and that's all Indonesia has, low labor costs, even in automobiles, don't make that much difference. And this will again shift the balance of economic power worldwide. It will put an increasing emphasis on the productivity of knowledge. And so let me conclude, or at least build up to what is the greatest demand on management. The greatest demand is to increase the productivity of knowledge, which is abysmally low, which is roughly where the productivity of manufacturing was 100 years ago. Since then it has increased 50-fold. My goal for my clients is to increase the productivity of their knowledge people, because knowledge is people. The productivity of the knowledge people at least 5 to 8% each year compound, and I can do it. Not, I can very easily do it for technologists, for nurses in the hospital, for the people who service computers, for the people who service earth-moving equipment, the people who combine a high degree of knowledge with manual skill. There I can do it very easily. I can do it fairly easily for physicians. I cannot yet do it for teachers who probably have the lowest productivity of any major knowledge profession, because believe me, I've been teaching 70 years and it has not improved one bit. I cannot yet do it. Yeah, I can begin to do it for engineers doing routine engineering, largely by eliminating the things that interfere, getting rid of unnecessary things, writing reports, attending meetings, giving them more time to do engineering work. I cannot yet do it for architects or design engineers, though I'm working on architects. And it is reasonably clear where the productivity increases will have to come, but not at all clear yet how to get them. And so the first conclusion, and this is really answering Senora Silvia Forcada of Compaq, Argentina. What skill do you consider important for company leaders in the information technology age? The first skill I consider important is the skill to increase the productivity of themselves and of their knowledge workers. And we know enough to know that the key to it is to ask the question, what is your job, what are you being paid for, and to make sure that everything that interferes with this is eliminated or played down. I have tripled, at least doubled, in most cases tripled, the productivity of nurses in the hospital by asking that question and getting the paperwork out of their work. Yes, the paperwork has to be done, but not by highly trained, highly educated nurses. Ordinary clerks who have nothing but a secondary school education can do it just as well. And suddenly the nurse is trained for patient care. And the second skill, Senora Forcada, is to learn that you will have to play a number of roles. You will still have to be the boss. It is nonsense to believe that there will be no command. There has to be somebody in an organization who can make a final decision, or the organization degenerates into a debating society. And in a crisis, and every business, every organization gets into a crisis sooner or later, and usually sooner. In a crisis, there has to be somebody who says, this is it, period, and is obeyed, or she. And you have to know who this is. And at the same time, the same person will have to be a team member, and will have to accept that a 24-year-old who knows absolutely nothing about finance and nothing about marketing, but far more about metallurgy or far more about customer service, is the team leader on something that has to do with metallurgy and has to do with customer service. And that person will also have to be a team leader and know how to build a team, which is not simple, and how to keep it together and keep it focused. And the same person will have to be a partner with all those alliances where you can't command. These new relationships are marketing relationships. They're not command relationships. And in marketing, you don't start out with what do I want, but you start out with the question, what are the values of the customer, of the partner, what are the values, what are the goals of the partner, how does the partner think, what makes sense to him or her. You have to understand it. You start with the other side and not with yourself. And these skills, every manager, every professional will have to acquire. And so far, no, yes, they are beginning, but they are only beginning. And we in the business schools, by the way, are not yet teaching them. Those are some of the things that I would stress. But I would also stress that in the information age, the most important information you need is not one, Senora Focada, that comes out of your compact PCs, and let me see, I'm one of your satisfied customers. The most important information is about the outside. And there we have no information. We have very broad statistics, but most of them very unreliable. And I think all of you know how unreliable our big economic statistics are. For instance, the emergence of the individual as investor, direct investor in the American stock market was totally unprecedented, and there were no statistics that would lead anybody to that conclusion. Yes, if you went out in the market, as one of my friends and clients did, you found it. But at first nobody believed it. So all our major financial institutions totally neglected what has been the biggest financial growth market in the U.S., and by the way, is rapidly becoming the biggest financial growth market in Europe and in Japan as well, which is the individual direct investor. In 1929, at the height of the American stock market boom, 3% of all American families were in the stock market. That was still true in 1975. Maybe it was 5%, but it hadn't changed. It's almost 50% today in 20 years. Totally unprecedented and totally unexpected. And unless you went out into the community and began to sell and discover that people nobody ever thought of them as investment customers, were eager to invest and needed very different securities, but also very different expert suppliers. You missed it. And with one or two exceptions, every single one of the major American or of the major European financial institution has missed it. And so one of the basic skills you have to acquire is to get information from the outside, which does not come through your computer, cannot come through your computer, because the only things that can come out of your computer is what you put in, and that is inside information, because that's all you have. You have to go out. You have to look at the assumptions you make about the outside society, economy, consumers, consumer values, consumer psychology, and that you can only get by being outside a good deal. And in that sense, the computer is a danger. Again and again, it's making management inside focused because it gives them so much information about the inside. And so the final thing I'm going to say about the behavior of managers and professionals and companies is in the next 10, 15 years, we will have to organize the supply of information about the outside. And this has two fingers. One is that we start out with the question, what do we assume about the outside, and then go out and test it. And the other one is that we go out and actually look and say if this trend were meaningful, what would it mean for us?